Earlier this year, a few other gardeners and I constructed a small rock garden here at my church. Now the garden is located in sort of a protected spot. It's got a wall to the south, another wall to the east, and then about 40 feet away there's another wall on the north. So it's sort of a unique enclosed microhabitat where we might get away with growing a few species of plants that otherwise wouldn't overwinter in a more exposed location. These walls sort of give us a little bit of protection. Well, you can see that we've added quite a bit of soil and created this mound or bermed up area to help better show off the rocks and some of these smaller plants. Another good thing the added soil does is to provide us with some really good drainage that we need. All of this soil is held in place by this low rock retaining wall out here in front. And this wall was put together mostly by a group of our local Boy Scouts. And in particular, a young man named Peter Buchanan spent a lot of time on this project. Directly behind the rock wall, we've added some landscape fabric to help hold the soil in place. It allows the water to run through, but keeps the soil from washing out through the cracks in the rocks. The soil for this spot is a really good soil for a rock garden. We started out with a very sandy, loam type of soil. We added lots of organic matter to create the perfect texture and a great well-drained soil for this spot. The rocks that we've used in this garden, we tried to arrange in a natural way. They're kind of set up in a stair step or sort of a slightly overlapping shelf type pattern to roughly give the appearance of a couple of lines of strata that have deteriorated and kind of worn away. And the rocks were a little bit small, so it was a little bit of a challenge to make it look like a natural occurrence. But we did a little trick here to try to make some of these rocks look a little bit larger. Right here we took two rocks that had similar texture, similar color, and a flat side, placed them, really close together. The depth or the height of the rocks were also positioned where those would be about the same height. So this sort of appears to be like one rock that split over time and sort of developed a fissure there. And we get some plants growing in there, and from a distance it sort of looks like one larger rock. We've also partially buried these rocks so they look a little more permanent. So it does look a little more natural, not as if they were just strewn about or simply plopped onto the ground. Well, if you use smaller rocks in your rock garden, you're also going to have to use pretty small plant material. Otherwise, the plants would grow up and all your rock work would be hidden. So that's kind of what we've tried to do right here. We've used a mix of very small plants that are both hardy and some tender plants. Right down here we've got some fanflower or scaevola that is still looking good despite a few frosts that we've had here in Stillwater. Of course, fanflower was one of our Oklahoma Proven annuals a couple years ago, but this is a really good way to grow this plant. It likes having a raised bed or large container somewhere where it can kind of spill out over the edge. Right next to it is a silvery foliage plant native to Texas. This is woolly Stemodia, and it's one of those that is probably not going to be that winter hardy here. Have had it overwinter in very mild winters, but in this protected location we may get it to survive. But very low growing trailing plant. It looks very well spilling over this rock wall. We had some wishbone flower or Torenia, but the cold weather has pretty much got it shut down right now. A few very low-growing perennial plants in the back here that are working very well for us are this one. This is the little blue star creeper, or Laurentia fluviatilis. This is the same ground cover that we have in our Japanese garden at our studio gardens that sort of resembles moss. Right up here we've got some variegated Ajuga. This is the Ajuga known as Burgundy Glow. It's highly variegated. It's got white, green, a little bit of pink, and almost sort of a silvery color to it. but these are as tall as they're going to get right now, so they'll work very well for us and not cover up the rocks. We've also got some dwarf mondo grass, some hens and chicks, and a few other very small plants. Well, we also planted some rose moss in this rock garden this spring and gave us a really good display, but as our warmer weather has gone away for the year, so has the showy appearance of our rose moss. So we're just going to pull this out of here and plant some small spring flowering bulbs. We've got a collection of small spring flowering bulbs right here that should fit the scale of this rock garden very well. If we were to use some of the more traditional larger bulbs like tulips, hyacinths, or even some of the larger daffodils, they may be a little bit overpowering, and their foliage and flowers would also hide a great deal of our rock work. So we're going to plant some crocus, some miniature iris, some chiandoxa, some small species tulips, and a few others to give us that low color in the springtime. The crocus that we're going to plant, we actually have several different varieties and colors of crocus, very early spring blooming plants in the iris family. But this particular species right here, Crocus tomasinianus, is very durable crocus, very easy to naturalize. They do better for southern gardeners than some of the larger Dutch hybrid crocus. These are native to Bosnia, Serbia, and around in that area. So they're very tough, very good for using in the south. We're going to plant the crocus. We're also going to use these dwarf miniature iris that we've got right here, Iris reticulata. And these iris are unique in that, unlike the traditional iris that have sort of a rhizome, these iris grow from bulbs. These are very small bulbs that we'll use for this garden. We're also going to plant the species tulip, Tulip clusiana, and this is a smaller tulip. The petals are long and pointed, and they're red and sort of a cream color, but Tulip clusiana does work well for us here in Oklahoma. Several years ago, when we planted several different types of species tulips in our rock garden, at our studio garden, all of them died except for Tulip clusiana. So this is the one we're definitely going with. Well, I'm just going to come over here and start planting a few of these bulbs. Now, these smaller bulbs don't really have to be planted as deep as your daffodils or tulips. They only need to be in the ground about 3 to 4 inches. So I'm just going to take a trowel here, work down, get that bulb down in there. When we say 3 or 4 inches, we're talking about the bottom of the bulb to the top of the soil. This will give them just enough insulation, and they should naturalize and be very happy. Make sure we get the tip or the bud of the bulb pointed straight up on all of these, so they will all flower at about the same height. Now, you can plant your bulbs as close together as you want to. Just make sure they're not touching each other down in the ground. Otherwise, you can have some rotting problems. And when you get your bulbs in the mail, or if you go and pick them up at a nursery or somewhere and you're not able to get them in the ground right away, they need to be stored somewhere cool and dry, somewhere where the temperature doesn't get down to 32 degrees or freezing, and also somewhere where it doesn't get above about 70 degrees. Now, you can store bulbs in the refrigerator as long as you don't have any other fruits in there, and that's because the apples, oranges, grapefruits, things like that give off a gas called ethylene that can actually damage the embryonic flower bud inside the bulb. So you may have all leaves and no flowers next year if something like that happened. So we'll keep working these down inside the soil here. I like planting the bulbs in little clumps or small masses. That way, when they all bloom at once, you get the most impact of the different species or the separate colors. Another advantage to planting the very small bulbs is that it's easy to work them in among some of your established perennials. Like right here, we're going to just try to work these little bulbs down inside the blue star creeper. May take a little while, but we can get these in place, not do very much disturbing of these plants. These ought to look really nice coming up between the cracks of these rocks and also coming up through the foliage of the ground cover in the springtime. Well, once we get all these bulbs planted in place in here in little pockets or little masses, we'll come back, we'll water these in to settle all the soil around the bulbs. If the weather forecast calls for freezing, a hard freeze, the very night that you plant your bulbs, you don't want to water them in, or they could have some freezing problems and cause some damage in that way. We'll add some mulch to this area, about a 3 or 4 inch thick layer of mulch to help insulate those bulbs and regulate the freezing and thawing of the ground. And then in the spring, we ought to have a really nice display of all these different species and different colors of these showy little spring gems.